when we begin the brand strategy, it is quickly apparent that we are answering questions that should have been answered much sooner. And that would have led them in making better decisions.
Hello and welcome to Brand Tuned, a podcast on brand management that covers trademarks and IP as they're intrinsic to brand equity. I'm your host, Shireen Smith, author of Brand Tuned. Writing this led to Byron Sharp's evidence-based research, stressing distinctiveness over differentiation, which I largely agree with, though not totally. Hence our tagline, Sharp Branding. My guest today is Derrick Day, managing partner of the Blake Project. His experience is as extensive as it is diverse, encompassing the disciplines of business and brand strategy, advertising, and public relations. Prior to launching the brand consultancy, the Blake Project, in 2003, Derrick held rewarding leadership roles at global advertising agency Saatchi & Saatchi, as well as at 3 other respected agencies. Derrick, welcome to the Brand Tuned podcast.
Shireen, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here with you and your audience.
Great. Could you tell us a bit more, Derrick, about what you do, what your background is in brand?
Yes. So I'm the managing partner of the Blake Project, which is a strategic brand consultancy that I founded back in 2003. And essentially, we help organizations and brands increase their value, release their full potential, and actually help them on searching journeys arrive at optimistic decisions about their competitive future. And we help brands in all stages of development, from startups to global brands. And that's really been the focus of my career. In the early days, I was in the management tier at Saatchi & Saatchi, a leading ad agency. And then I founded this consultancy. So it's very rewarding work. And to prove it, I have an opportunity here with you to meet you and your audience today.
Yeah, it's great, actually, your experience, because one of the issues I've been grappling with is if somebody decides their business strategy, which would include their vision, mission, values, positioning, and all that, and then they come to decide what their brand strategy would be, which I guess will be much closer to the time when they're going to have a visual identity. How do the two strategies play in with each other, so to speak, in practice?
It's a really fascinating question. And it's fascinating just because looking at how business has evolved over time. I think to get to the answer, you have to start at looking at what's been shifting. So let me first start by saying there's really been a shift over time between business in general. For example, B2C, business to consumer, B2B, business to business, has really morphed into a place where we're at business, B2P, business to people. And that has, I think, triggered the understanding that business strategy and brand strategy in many ways are one and the same. And both are sources of value. Now, one may be the thing that you make or the thing that you do, while the other is the human side of those things. And we all know that when it counts, it counts because of the human side, how people respond to whatever value you have created. So in my view, when it comes to, what should go first? Should it be a business model, a strategy, or should we look at that? Or should we look at brand strategy? The conversations have to be taking place at the same time at these embryonic stages. And in more definitive terms, think brand first, business second. So in that sense, what you're doing is you're asking first what is most asked second these days, which is, who do you want to be your customers? How do you want the world to change for them? How would you want them to feel? And in the context of your idea, and start with those brand questions first. Answering those is going to give you the pathway to building this human side of your business, which is absolutely critical. Now, I know there's been a struggle of sorts. What do I work on first? And even when I meet with and work with startups, they have typically come to me when they've already gone through the business strategy. But when we begin the brand strategy, it is quickly apparent that we are answering questions that should have been answered much sooner. And that would have led them in making better decisions for their business in the marketplace. And so I do think there is a growing amount of brand consultants, business people that are adopting that idea that you really need to think brand first and business strategy second. But the two have to be thought out in unison and at these embryonic stages.
I think one of the problems is that for many small businesses, they equate branding with something a designer can do, a visual identity sort of designer, and then they think they've done branding. I mean, it's to do with the fact that I assume they think a brand is a logo, even though they might say they don't think that. In practice, that's how they tend to behave, in that they go to a designer as soon as they want help with their branding. So, from that point of view, I would have thought they're better off to work on their business first before they translate it into a brand strategy, if they're going to go to a designer rather than, somebody else.
Yeah, Shireen, you're exposing an ongoing problem in the world of marketing, and that is that there's too many people that think brands are a logo, and this is decades and decades into brand management. Brand management was first popularized by Procter & Gamble about 80 years ago. And here we are decades later. In brand management, your brand identity is only one component of your brand. The way that I define brands is that it's a sum of all the experiences a customer has with you. So it's a totality of everything at every possible customer touch point. It comes together to encode one thing about you in the minds of your target customers. So when there is a pull to make a logo or get to the tactics, it's human nature to want to get to the creative side of building a brand. But in fact, you have to think about, well, what kind of value am I going to own in the mind? And is that value going to be unique and compelling? So those are the things that you have to think about first, and then they inform what your logo is. But when startup business founders, they initially are thinking about an idea, they are also thinking about, well, what can I get done now? And perhaps for some of them, it's, well, I can make a logo now. I need to begin communicating what this business is all about. But it's still today, it's the mark of an unsophisticated business person or I dare say marketer to think that making a logo is making a brand. Brands are also seen as meanings, and if you look at your logo, you could look at it like a vessel. and you're going to pour meaning into that. And so when people see that, they understand what it is and why it matters to them. So it all comes back to this, Shireen. Marketers have done a very poor job of marketing. They've created confusion. We have over 10 accepted definitions of what a brand is. There is, we even in the discipline itself, you could talk to someone that says they're a brand strategist, and you find out that they simply will help you create a LinkedIn profile. So even it's very, a brand strategist could be someone that's working, helping a global brand think through this unique value, or it could be someone setting up a LinkedIn account. I mean, it's just all over the road. And that has, I think, limited people's understanding and actually held business back. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah, that's actually one of the reasons I'm writing this book, because I see so many business owners have problems because they chose a name, maybe with a designer, maybe without a designer, without understanding there's a legal dimension to it. So there's a lot that business owners don't know. And when they go to a branding person, a designer, they assume that that designer knows everything they need to know, and they often don't know about IP. So, this is one of the problems that I'm trying to address in this book, is to kind of say, if you had a brand manager in a business, there would be somebody who would know all the different skills to pull in at which point in time. And the business owner often doesn't know this because they're probably much more clueless than everyone else in the space. So that's what's missing, I think, some sort of brand management service for smaller businesses. And they're 99% of all businesses are small businesses.
I think one of the key takeaways here is that creative, which is what we, a component of creative would be your brand identity. Creative without strategy is art. And when you come to a designer to make your logo and you haven't thought through the brand positioning, what kind of unique value are you creating and for whom, you're essentially given that designer an art project. That's what you're doing. And that is not going to put you in the best position to win in the marketplace. What you need to start with is ideally, you start with the mind of your target customer. What matters to them? You figure that out. And what I like to say is, get in possession of the truth. Understand that the private voice of your target customer, what are they saying about your products, your services, competitors? What are they saying to themselves about those things? Be in possession of the truth. And then when you have that, then you can use that to inform your brand positioning, which is, what value am I going to create that matters to those most important in my future? What's going to be at the top of that pyramid? And so what happens is, especially with startups, small business owners, is there's a tendency for, could be several reasons, to skip steps and just get to the tactics. The unfortunate thing, and I must say that there is a fair percentage of the startups that I work with, they've raced into the marketplace without thinking through the brand strategy. They've been out in the market for a year and a half, 2 years, sometimes 3, and they're realizing that they're not resonating with their target customers. There's a connection that is there's actually you could say a misfire. So then they bring in they bring me in, and we talk about well, what is this brand all about? What kind of difference are you trying to make in the lives of your target customers? And we understand in the process that they've raced out into the market and they have essentially encoded things that were not advantageous to them as a business in the minds of their target customers. So that creates a problem where at its most extreme, you've got to get someone to change their mind about you. And that is often the hardest work of all. And in the most extreme cases, you end up changing your name. So, thinking this through, the adage, you only get one chance to make a first impression. It very much rings true in this case of building brands and introducing them to the marketplace. What do we want people to remember about us? That's where you want to. That's why building a brand. It's careful work. It's thoughtful work. It's not something. Hey, look, a designer came up with a great logo. I guess I have a brand. It has to be driven by strategy.
Sure. Do you have any tips for how to understand what customers want and need?
Well, Shireen, that's kind of a broad question because of interesting because of just the many different types of businesses and industries you could be in. But let me just say, maybe back to what they need, I would answer it this way. It starts with first figuring out, answering some big questions for you, so before you can go out to the customer. So figure out, if the world, what would the world miss if my brand or my offering did not exist? And if the answer to that question is not much, then you have to, you've got a lot of work to do. Another question I would ask is, if we could make our customers feel one thing, what would it be? So be very intentional about the emotions you're trying to evoke. Another question would be, do we have enough evidence to support any claims we're making? We're living in a world where there's a demand for transparency, authenticity. You better have enough proof. You better have enough evidence. And if you don't, you need to get to work in creating real evidence to back up your claims. Another thing that I would encourage founders to really think about is, in an over-communicated society where you're either the signal or the noise, what is the minimum that is required in our communications that would simplify what we're all about? What's the minimum, rather than going out and designing all of these things that clutter the market? What is the minimum? And you'll always hear Apple being a great example, because their minimalist approach was one of the things that helped drive their business. So those are some of the keys that I think founders, startups, businesses, they have to know to grow. They have to really have a handle on those answers. So when they get out in the marketplace, their value will be crystal clear. That's a real key.
Talking about Apple reminded me, in the book Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, he analyzes in great detail the choices that were open to Steve Jobs when he returned to Apple. And it wasn't by any means obvious what the solution was. So it was good strategy on his part, good decision making, which set Apple on the right road. So that was making the business strategy first. And then afterwards, came the brand strategy and Apple thinking through its whole sort of brand, I guess.
You're absolutely right. I mean, that we often refer to Apple and just the brilliance of what was accomplished there, and Steve Jobs' focus on um, the human side of what this would become, and also just the unlikeliness of it, because if you got to learn about him as a human, he wasn't really a real friendly one.
Mm.
So there's lots of kind of the plot thickens in that story. But what we've seen now and today and where we are is the world desperately needs the warmth of human centric brands. So even in business to business, there is somewhat of an awakening that we need to understand how to better connect with people. This is everybody that's in business is in the people business. And for many years, and I'm going to pick on B2B for a little while here. For many years, I think the B2B people thought they had a license to be boring. They had a license to not think about people in terms of them being people, that they were some kind of machines that made decisions, just based on price. And that's just not the case. There are emotional drivers to purchase decisions in B2B just as much as there are in B2C. For example, in the B2B world, it's about mitigating risk. So the focus has to be on how can I give you confidence, clarity in this, that whatever you're about to purchase is going to make you feel and look like a hero in your in your own company when you make this purchase. It all comes back to the science-backed understanding that 100% of purchase decisions are based on emotions, and that's so key. And when I talk about emotional connections, one more thought on this, Shireen. When I talk about emotional connections, what I want people to really understand is that, while love is an emotion for people, for brands, it needs to be an action. And it can be an action when you focus on building these emotional connections. So you'll still find CFOs, you'll find CEOs that would dismiss this idea of building emotional connections, even with science, being presented to them. But I gotta now come back and compliment marketers, because the field of marketing is what creates the future. Marketing creates the future. They're the closest to the customers. They're the closest to the market, where accounting tracks the past. And marketing's about the future, and so we are getting some important things right in marketing, and we're right out in front. And so take your marketing seriously is probably the big takeaway here, and not just hand it to a designer and think that your job is done, or your job is getting started. You're not even getting started at that point. You've got to come back and figure out, well, what's at the core of what I'm creating here, and how will that change the lives of those that matter most to my offering's future. So there's other questions to answer, but you've got to start by answering some big questions.
So how would you inject emotion into a brand?
Yeah, so you would think about, so let me kind of break down a little bit of what a brand positioning statement is. It starts with an understanding of your customer. That's usually done with what we call a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This is a component that hopefully would be married with some research in the marketplace. If that was possible, we would have that first, and then we would move into understanding who your primary target customer is. And I'm building up to your answer. Who represents the most value? The next thing we get into is something called brand essence, which is the heart and soul of a brand. An example would be Starbucks. Three words: adjective, adjective, noun format. Rewarding everyday moments. So those three words, every decision Starbucks makes, they make through that lens. Does this coffee bean reward everyday moments? Could this new employee reward everyday moments? Does this soft seating, does this pricing strategy reward everyday moments? And if the answer is no, you don't do it. Now, the next step, and this is all part of, consulting work, we think through all these steps, but this next step is where the differentiation happens and where you have an opportunity to infuse your first opportunity to think about emotion in strategy terms. So the brand promise is, what is the only thing that my company can do or my offering can do that others cannot. So that word "only" is very, very heavy, and this is what makes the work so hard, but also most valuable, is deciding this unique value. And in that unique value, what you're looking for is, how can we be unique in terms of not just what we do and what we're offering, but or even how we're communicating that value, but how we can make people feel. So there's some very pointed questions here. What are we going to leave someone with once they experience this offer? And you've got to what we say laddering up, and that is going above features and benefits and getting up to that emotional tier, and where emotional connection is created. And this is part of, if you look at business strategy, brand strategy, and you take on the attitude that what you're building is something for a person, then you'll go at these questions differently. There was a long time ago, a long time ago, this is when I was a teenager. I'm much older than that now. But I actually had a radio show in my late teens, and it was a show that was for demographic with our target demographic was about a woman 28 to 35 years old, roughly there. And my program director, he cut out a picture of a woman that fit that description, and he taped that on the wall in front of the microphone. And that was to remind all of us that we're talking to people, not talking to some mechanical thing. And we needed to connect with that person. And that's what you have to do when you're thinking about business, because you're building this human side to your brand, actually, whether you like it or not. Even if you do nothing, people will take away a feeling about the experience that they had with you. It's critical that's a component in how you approach this.
I think that makes complete sense. What's confused me somewhat is Byron Sharp's work, where he says that meaningful differentiation doesn't matter, and that all that matters is distinctiveness. So it's about being distinctive as a brand, but that presumably might be the experience people have of the brand. I'm trying to work out, how do you not worry too much about differentiation, but then what are you doing in branding if you're not going to differentiate? How do you create a brand if it's just about, and he says distinctiveness is about looking like yourself, being recognizably yourself. Have you read?
Yes, I have, and I commend Byron Sharp because he has elevated the conversation of brand, And something to consider in brand strategy and business strategy is neither one is ever finished. It's not a pond, it's a river. We're all evolving, we're all thinking about this. But where Brian Sharp is going is also something I agree with, and that is a related concept of shared values. I see some of me in you. We have that connection. And another way to look at that is the makers of the stuff are also the users of the stuff. So, in its best reflection, and in a real world example would be Patagonia, where the legend of Patagonia, the clothing brand, is that and it's about 30 minutes from my home. Patagonia, you won't find any of their employees there on Fridays because they're out mountaineering, surfing, doing all the things that their customers do in wearing their products. So the shared values concept is Patagonia also believes in protecting the environment, which is important to me. That's the thing.
Well, not everyone has a social purpose. I mean, it works for them or Tom's Shoes, but not every brand can have a social purpose. I mean, Apple doesn't have a social purpose.
Well, you pose an interesting question, Shireen, because I think the question now is, what is your social purpose? And if you don't have one, maybe you should be considering how you're showing up in the world beyond making money and beyond, what is that thing that you can do? See, and this is because of the importance of brands has been elevated over the last 10 to 15 years. People want brands to fix the world now. That used to be the job of institutions. But with the erosion of trust in institutions, I'm talking government institutions, I'm talking religious institutions, I'm talking even in some cases academia. Now you have brands. And brands are stepping up to fill the role of fixing the world. And so this has now become an expectation, especially with younger generations. And so a conversation about your purpose is become a conversation about your future and whether or not your business is going to earn a place in the future. So, a colleague of mine, this is a long time ago, a mentor of mine, Jack Trout, who actually coined the term positioning. Okay, great. So Jack told me this is at the dawn of the discovery that emotional connections through brain science, we learned that emotional connections could happen. And Jack very frankly told me, no one's going to fall in love with a roll of toilet paper. But now I think we have to think about that roll of toilet paper and say, well, we know that people can fall in love with that. They can have an emotional connections that turn into a preference for that. But even beyond that is could that roll of toilet paper also be protecting our planet? How could that roll of toilet paper also have reflect shared values with their target customer? So there's a bigger context now in which we need to refer to in building brands. We have to think about more, and there's more at stake, and there's more expectations.
But surely we're all too busy to go falling in love with brands. I mean, we come across so many brands that we just need to distinguish one from another and think, okay, that's the brand I'm going to buy because it did the job last time and I don't have to make a choice. I'm not sure about falling in love with brands.
Yeah, it's there'll be a time when your preferred brand just a shortcut. Once that shortcut in the mind is created, you'll just reach for the same one over and over on the shelf. It will be very hard to change your behavior. In fact, to change behaviors requires changing the incentives, right? But as far as building an emotional connection and brands can very much hold a dear place in people's lives, and you can see that maybe another obvious example here would be, or well-known example would be Starbucks, where people will pass 4 other coffee shops to get to a Starbucks. They built that kind of an emotional connection. It's not around, it's beyond the coffee. It is now become a place that, that product is part of who they are. And so that connection is strong. But what I advocate for is being very intentional about building emotional connections. Now, if you're an established brand in the market and you're trying to get somebody to feel something different about you, that can be, I think, problematic. But I think that you can find strategies to move people your way that maybe didn't think about you in a certain way before. And the only way to do that is by understanding emotions. And in movements we're even seeing around the world. I've been spending time working with Dr. Martin Luther King's daughter, Bernice King, helping her think through the future of taking on inequality and injustice, and how the strength of her brand can enable that. It all comes back to emotion that is driving people out to the streets and saying enough is enough.
So if you're a young brand, would you create a story? Is that how you would create this emotion?
Well, story is a very important component to this, right? This is a story is where you communicate your value. So stories are essential, but they have to lead us back to this truth, which is what you're really about on the inside. So story comes after brand strategy. After you position the brand, then you can work on the story work. What's the most important message do we want to communicate? What different storylines could we pursue? Let's strategically think through what stories this brand can tell that will matter, and also help us separate from other ideas in the marketplace. So story is absolutely critical. I'm glad you brought that up. Story can sometimes be, people can start on stories before, just like they can with logos, before they should be working on those.
But if they should be working on their brand mantra, presumably that's the same as the brand essence. It's another word. How do they even do that then?
Yeah, so brand essence, the heart and soul of your brand or brand mantra, that happens in that positioning work, and then that informs the story. What I really want people to know is don't skip steps. Do not alter the sequence of this work. It's a proven pathway. Is study the mind of your target customer. Position your brand as it matters to them. Work on the story and the your identity and packaging and those types of things that will help communicate that value. And when possible, use design thinking to bake in this meaning into the products themselves. And certainly consider another thing that I think is important is understanding you have to build the brand from the inside out. So get your people involved so they know how to what this promise you're making is all about and how they can deliver on it. So those things are all key, but it comes back to what are we going to change in the world with this new offering? What are we going to what kind of actions are we going to take to help people feel a certain way about us? What kind of proof are we going to create so they can believe in what we're saying? Those are the things, and once you figure that out, then you can get into let's drill down more into the products and services. What are people, or what are we going to offer people that they're not getting now? How are we going to work with them to make this new offering something that's better for them in their lives? So these are the kind of questions that I think have been asked first in some cases, but they need to be flipped in what I said earlier about putting brand first, business second.
It seems to me that this could occupy years of someone's time thinking all this through. How long in practice do you need with a relatively young business? Say they've been in business 3-4 years, they're rebranding. How long do you need to help them sort out their brand strategy so they're very clear and can go ahead?
I'm going to answer that running the risk of my work being discounted. It really, a lot of this work is accomplished in 1 or 2 day strategy workshops. I've just completed work with a startup brand in the Netherlands funded by the Dutch government. And we spent 2 full strategy days. And then I spent a week before those days going through research that they had conducted, preparing for that workshop. So you can really get there in a quick amount of time. But what I would want your audience to know, it isn't it's probably the obvious. It isn't the amount of time you spend on something that matters. It's the outcomes. So the process, if we figure this out in a couple days, it should not be discounted. But you can have all of the things I've mentioned today, including story and your most important messaging, in 2 full days of workshop time. And one of the reasons a lot of my work, not all of it, but a lot of my work is in these workshop formats is because founders and organizations can get quick wins. They can get their executives together and things can move quickly through a process that we have, and we have validated over 200 brands in all stages of development.
Okay, that's interesting. So what should they know about themselves before they come to you to get maximum value from their time with you?
They certainly are going to want to know what business category they're in. How are they competing in the world, or how they intend to compete in the world? It's possible that they've created new value that will have no competition, and but they need to bring some kind of frame of reference, at least what they want to achieve in the world. It could be something as simple as this, saying, I want to change how people hail a taxi. I want to change how they feel about that. Create some kind of ease and frictionless experience in taxi hailing. Mm-hmm. And then I want that to manifest in some kind of app. so they can easily hail a taxi. And I also want to incentivize people that own their own cars to be that taxi. And then here I have an idea which sounds and looks a lot like Uber, because that's what it is. And then we have enough to say, okay, well, let's put a lens on top of this to help us make decisions that resonate with the people that will be hailing these taxis, and strengthen that business model, and very closely align it with brand strategy. That's maybe I painted the picture that you were looking for, Shireen. I hope I have. If not, push me more.
Exactly. It's what I was thinking, that, they've got to have some idea about their business strategy, what they're going to be doing, and then you build on top of that.
Yeah, whatever it is, they need to know that if they don't define it for people, it will be defined for them.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets dangerous, because out in the marketplace, that leaves it up to your customer to figure it out, and they may not always get it right. And then you open the door for your competitor to define what you're all about. That's never a good idea. And then that takes us to the most dangerous place, where you could be in a position where you have to ask people to change what they think about you, which is often the hardest work of all.
Yeah, to change perceptions. That's been really useful. Thank you very much indeed, Derrick. Is there anything else that I should be asking you that you think is important to mention in this context?
Yeah, there is one more thing. I would say, and this goes back to my mentor, Jack Trout, in his words, marketing is too important to be left to the marketers. So if you are a CEO, a founder, and you think that, well, I'm just going to hand this off to an agency or a marketer on my staff, or whoever's running my social media or whatever, and then you don't have to do anything with it, you're making a big mistake. You need to be the ultimate marketer in the organization. And Steve Jobs, who was really wearing that marketing hat in his small startup in his garage, he proves that point of how important marketing is in bringing a brand to life. So you need to put your marketing hat on, because that is going to be the activity that creates value in people's minds. And you absolutely need to get that right. It's not going to be enough to create a product that has more features than a competitor. It still has to resonate with people. And in that sense, you've got to think about, well, how am I going to build this connection of warmth to my idea? And that takes us back to the work of brand strategy.
Great. Thank you very much indeed. That's really useful.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for this week. Do subscribe to the Brand Tuned newsletter to get weekly updates. I'd also love to get your feedback. Just send me an email to info@brandtune.com. Finally, if you liked the episode, please do share it with your friends and colleagues and review it on iTunes or whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts. If you leave us a 5-star review, it means more people will listen and we can spread the word much more quickly about the podcast. Thank you, and bye for now.